Right, so we'll make a start then. And good afternoon. My name is Simon Green. I'm the owner of Green Building Design. We're a firm of mechanical and electrical consultants, and we sort of specialise in energy, energy saving, carbon reduction schemes. And as now part of that grows, people are asking us a bit more about the social responsibility in these buildings and how it's all going to be governed. And that's loosely then termed the ESG. So we thought we'd just try and run a lecture to explain at least a bit more about ESG and where some of it's starting to go, and where we think it will continue to develop. It's a hot topic for business. Press talk about now that 92% of consumers are more likely to trust a company that does actively support social and environmental issues. And, whilst the business and the policies can be very, very dynamic on that, it's how does that then get extended into your building and into your office on making it an ESG friendly type building. So the construction industry as a whole obviously is facing ongoing challenges from labour. We've coming out of Europe, we've got shortages of labour, there's skills, there's rising costs. The Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee, the BEIS, are now reporting that material costs for purchasing material is going to rise from 2020 October through to 2021 October to be 24.5% on average, which is obviously all going to impact on the challenge of going green. Obviously, what's massively offset against that now is a lot of people are now realising how expensive energy is going to be in the short term. Some of that is artificially inflated with the war, but my experience often when these things go up in cost, they take an awful long time to go down. So, with people now potentially seeing increased bills of sort of 4 and 5%, 3 or 4 times, we are seeing increased now people, really, really focusing on environmental and, how can I make it more environmentally friendly and obviously save, substantial money. And as invariably, a lot of these things that you do, what's the payback period? To give you a classic example, photo cells to go on your roof that make energy. Typically, we would be quoting a 13, 14, 15, maybe even 16-year payback, whereas now with energy costs being 4 times as much as they were 18 months ago, those paybacks have almost dropped to 4 years, which suddenly makes putting PV on your roof super, super attractive. But it's not just going green. Investors, landlords, tenants are now all looking at ways to be more than just a space for their office to live in. The office is almost considered a part of a home, and now opportunities to reduce our impact on the planet whilst creating that space can promote well-being for the occupiers and incorporating well-being amenities and much more communal spaces. Most new buildings now that we're looking at, we're very much, talking about putting in opportunities and space for bicycles to be left securely, and then, really good facilities for showering and drying the towels. And that is part of that S of your ESG. Providing that much more social environment in your building. People keep using these acronyms, and I've often heard a few people say, even in my office, last week, what does ESG, actually mean, and what does it really stand for? And in the terms of ESG, as it says on that slide there, it stands for environmental, social and governance, and the acts as the foundation for businesses to approach that social and environmental factors. So environmentally probably is clearly much more where I'm more knowledgeable when it's my business. It is the impact on the environment and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from that building or from that office, factory, warehouse. Estimation about 40% of all greenhouse gases worldwide tend to relate to buildings of all shapes and sizes. Now, as this does show there's a huge impact that properties can have on the environment, it also represents, a great opportunity to, in effect, change, although there can, no longer be that large initial cost they're going to need to make with buildings, making them more energy efficient. But you know, when you're looking at bringing existing stock to the requirements of new MEES regulations, you know, over the next 10 years, you know, this is obviously going to get offset against much lower operational costs in the long term. And you know, from the point of view that energy, as I said, is so much more expensive than it was 18 months ago, those paybacks are tumbling and making that commercial decision to invest in those low energies so much more easier at the moment. However, for a true, you know, ESG building, you know, efficiency of the building is not sufficient enough to fully comply with what the government wants us to do. So the next part then is the S, which is the social. And I really, you know, that's looking at social lifestyle factors, you know, such as the WEL ratings, you know, increase their performance, and other ratings, you know, talking about the BREEAM, how the building has been built, how the building has been fitted out, and you know, BREEAM in particularly, you know, to get an excellent standard, it needs to be quite environmentally sound, needs to have additional fresh air, have other facilities, try to have been a local building using low carbon, and all of these other sort of standards are going to link in to try and then to, you know, promote your building as a BREEAM excellent building. What does that mean socially? Well, it hopefully means there's much more opportunity for car charging. There's much more opportunity for showers, to cycle in, have your bikes in a secure place. You know, we're trying to minimise the use of waste. You know, there will be encouragements, you know, done within the building. We were in a building once where they were trying to do use the lift no day. So you know, on Wednesdays, you know, you're not allowed to use the lift if you're only going to go 2 stories, and just trying to get people to use the stairs. One, to make yourself a little bit healthier and create a little bit of sort of well-being feeling that that we're trying to you know, make that building a better place socially for you to work in and enjoy. Designing buildings with well-being in mind, which is high on the agenda for landlords and employers. You know, this is, you know, ideally then focusing on making the building healthier. You know, if it's a healthier building, has better fresh air, better views, better light, you know, nicer surrounds, you know, more social space to have better cup of tea, coffee, maybe you know, there's a gymnasium added there. You know, it will then follow that, you know, people that are happy are healthier. If they're healthier, then there's a better productivity. Now, all of these things are connected, obviously, around what the landlords are being asked for by tenants, and what presumably employees are asking from tenants and employers to do. So, you know, this is not only obviously going to be good for the planet, but clearly it's also going to be good for people. If you enjoy going to work, if you enjoy working in your building, you're going to be happier. And obviously a bottom line with green buildings is that, you know, potentially they're going to demand larger rents. You know, London reckon that various agents are saying that they can command up to 12.3% higher rents by being BREEAM certified excellent in central London. You know, whether that's just estate agents making those statements without too much, but it has been in the press, so I guess it must be true if it's in the papers. So then the third point to the ESG is obviously governance. You know, as we all become aware, more socially and environmentally conscious, one element of it is obviously never forgotten is the governance. Governance is critical if you're going to try and ensure that your building has a clear code of ethics, and that any poor governance that could lead to major problems, you know, such as, for example, you know, as many people at Volkswagen knew that the emissions from their exhaust were wrong, and obviously that was never ever whistleblown and reported internally until it got found out externally, and then obviously became hugely costly for Volkswagen in terms of compensation and obviously brand reputation. So, you know, it's trying to promote within those buildings, you know, there's a clear governance of you know, ensuring that we are doing what we're saying, and reporting how the building is being used, and in line with those policies and the missions you've got. So whilst many may view, you know, ESG as just another tick box exercise to ensure we have a building that's fully compliant and doesn't really make any difference, you know, I think we've got to really have an inwardly look and ask ourselves, you know, are we making an actual difference environmentally? Are we socially trying to make it better? And are we then documenting that better with policies on how to behave in those buildings, how to treat each other, what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable? then if the company can, tick all of those areas of the compliance, trying to ensure then that, companies and buildings are much more sustainable in the long term, and obviously then become, let's say much more happy places to be, and hopefully happy staff mean, more profitable companies and happy all the way around, and we can get that better life balance. I still think there's a lot of people that don't really believe that we're destroying our world. And, with the environmental now, I think becoming more and more important, let's consider, this last summer, really, record high temperatures in Europe, in the UK, in China, in the USA. India's been having unbelievable numbers of high temperatures, and comparing that then just with next door, where you've got poor Pakistan and these terrible floodings. South Korea has not been reported as much. That's had terrible flooding as well. And, consequently then in most of Europe, you've got, the main rivers drying up. The USA has had the worst number of rivers drying up for the first time in 70 years. And of course, with these rivers drying up in Europe as well, in Germany, that's a massive impact on hydro energy, again, using all that water that's flowing by for farming, and obviously for transporting. So I mean, there's an awful lot of things that then double impact on the environment by the fact that this high weather is really starting to suffer and impede on our environment. I mean, obviously, without sounding political, the impact of the war is obviously having a tremendous impact on food and energy, and it's probably taken everybody by surprise by how completely integrated we are now as a world. Who would think a war in Russia would double the price of oil from my fish and chip shop? Who really knew that all this grain, was produced in Russia and Ukraine that feeds the whole of Africa, and the impact it's having. And I think to me, going back to ESG and the social side, it does all show now we may think we're a part of one country, but really we're completely now integrated into other countries. And we've really got to all start thinking much more about the planet as one, and not just our one country. And certainly to me, that's been quite interesting how a war in Europe is now integrating, rippling across the whole of the world. So the solution, well, clearly I haven't got the solution to the world's problems, but at least we can start talking about it and starting to put the right place, and talk about how we can save energy in buildings, and how we can integrate with socially in these buildings, and look at what things that people would want to do, and then maybe we can then talk about the governments of how those can be implemented with policies of building policies and what we would do. So how do companies successfully embed an ESG within their buildings and their daily business operations? We need to look at each one alongside modern methods of construction. We're going to find more inventive ways of building. Obviously, BIM is an augmented process, more visualization. We need our design teams to look at more sustainable materials. There's a whole piece of legislation that's about to be launched, where buildings will be assessed on how much carbon has been taken to make them, how much carbon is stored in that structure. Concrete is a very, very heavy material that takes a lot of energy to make. So it has a lot of stored carbon in it. And, should we just be flattening every building we see, or should we be really focusing in on trying to make those buildings reused and second purposed, with, leaving that frame in and saving that stored carbon without, either releasing it to the atmosphere or creating another equally load of new carbon to make an identical structure. That process is also going to lead us to creating hopefully smarter buildings, certainly more environmentally friendly buildings, and then hopefully along with that, the criteria and the bar is set then for the social integration within that building to follow on, and then finally the governance to control it with policy. So environmental, it isn't just really about the environmental efficiency. It's about finding that energy balance. We need to ensure that obviously our building is energy efficient, and with modelling, we can also look at that. And then we also now need to start considering, how energy and waste is going to leave our building. For example, you can store many solar panels on the roof, which clearly would be inefficient. But if you then decided, say, to add just electrical direct immersion heaters to the hot water, and trying to say, well, it doesn't really matter that it's really an inefficient heating system because we're getting the PV, it's kind of free, so it doesn't matter. Whereas we could maybe spend slightly more, maybe have a much more efficient system, say maybe an air source heat would be in your hot water, and then also you're only using a third of the energy to heat the hot water, and then potentially use that PV energy for elsewhere, or dominantly we can export it to the grid to use in the building next door, which clearly is a benefit to the world. So it's certainly that sort of joined up thinking, and really as part of that with the environmental design, we really need to start to train people on thinking about energy at work, thinking about saving energy, coming into the office and turning the lights off, using less energy, wearing a jumper and allowing the heating to be agreed to be turned down to perhaps 19 degrees. In the morning, we don't put the air conditioning on at 6 a.m. if we start. The first person in the office opens all the windows and lets, all the air at 6 o'clock in the morning that's pre-cool the office to try and hold off that air conditioning. And, certainly with energy costs now, there's going to be a massive drive by business owners and landlords and your line managers to use less energy when we're in that building. To really think like you're doing at home. I've got children, I'm constantly running around the house, turning the lights off, turning the TVs off, and asking my wife not to fill the kettle up to full when she boils a kettle, only to put unnecessarily water in just to make those 2 cups of tea. These are all things and lifestyle changes we're going to have to start bringing into our environmental and our social well-being if we really want to have an ESG compliant building, and obviously have that impact on the world. That's that engineering piece of really looking hard now about saving energy. Don't get that lift up 1 floor. Please walk up it. Walk down 2 floors or maybe 3 floors if you're able. Let's really focus on using those energies. To give you a little example, I went to a large factory in Bristol last week, on Monday, sorry, and they run their chilled water 24/7. And this is dominantly offices and a factory. And I said, why? He said, well, it doesn't really cost a great deal. We've got a free air chiller so that in the evening they get a lot of free cooling. So they don't run the compressors, but they run the fans. And then they got some pumps that pump all the water around. And I said, okay, well, let's look at that pump, shall we? And that was 11 kilowatt pump. They're on to 30p a kilowatt hour. 11 kilowatts times 30p times 365 days a year times 24 hours a day. It's £35,000, and the man nearly fell off his chair. People don't understand how expensive plant rooms are to be running, and we really need to start all really looking. They don't need their chilled water run at night time. And if he switches that pump just to 12 hours a day, he saves £17,000. At today's energy, and at Christmas when his energy jumps up again, he'll save £35,000. And he's been absolutely horrified by that. As he said, gosh, that's the cost of one of his engineers working in his factory. So he's now not going to sack one engineer, he's going to turn the pump off. And, those sorts of things are where we've all got to start thinking as part of our social awareness of, companies looking, now for you to be more diverse, to maybe look at the workplace. Do we need to have everybody in the office all the time? Can we maybe have it much more socially, where you have a part-time working situation, some days at home, sometimes in the office, desk sharing, so then we're not cooling and heating an enormous office that's half empty. With perhaps then if we're desk sharing and it's 50% at home, 50% in the office, maybe you can have smaller offices and save energy that way. Maybe it's better socially to have that culture, whereas part of the time at home. These are all now those important factors that businesses need to be looking at really as part of that ESG policy. The community, the social community should be brought into your building, thinking about how your building can impact, what it can offer to the local community, and bringing in that neighbour and that community is part of really what they want to do in part of the ESG approach. Companies will probably need new policies that are going to encourage people to use less energy. We've been talking to some schools recently about trying to make certain students energy champions, that they keep coming up with ideas how we can save energy. And difficult to monitor, but people like to be known as the person who's champion energy, and maybe a policy being written as with a Marks and Spencer's voucher, that anybody comes up with good ideas and they're followed through and they're sort of shown to making savings can be rewarded. Lights. How many people come into their office, turn the lights on at the start of the day and turn them off at the end of the day? We need to put better controls in, and have those lights switched off when it's not needed. We need to be siting our offices so they're very, very near public transport. Now, obviously in London, most buildings can be got to on public transport. Policies now are starting to be written which will discourage builders from having much car parking, forcing you to use public transport, forcing you to walk into work or cycle into work. Policies are being written now where they'll only employ staff on a certain number of miles from the office. And as I said, the main one really that people are really talking about as part of their social is a flexible working policy where you potentially can work at home for a number of days or work in a location to suit yourself. Excuse me, sorry, talking too much. So then the third part really then is governance, is to ensure that true governance, you need to have the correct reporting and reporting of how you're monitoring these buildings, reporting on whether things are failing. If a whistleblower blows the whistle, that he doesn't get reprimanded, and it can be either a procedure in place where you can report this, you can make recommendations and suggestions. I sometimes feel I'm a bit like the Gordon Ramsay of kitchens when I go in with my low energy head on and explain to the chef, what does the chefs do with the first thing they walk into kitchens in the morning? They put the extract fans on full blast to suck all the air out, all that lovely hot air comes out of the building. They then, because they're probably quite cold in those kitchens, they put all the gas burners on to heat the kitchens up. This building I was into on Monday, I walked into the kitchen at 10:30. Breakfast was all finished. They hadn't yet started doing any cooking for dinner yet. A little bit of cold prep was going on, yet all the extract fans were on, all the lights were on, and all 9 gas burners were on full. That's the way we do it. The hot water tap was running constantly during some washing and some plates. And I said, but would you do that at home? It doesn't matter. We have limitless hot water. These are the social changes and the policies that we need to start bringing in to areas that that use a lot of energy. And chefs probably are on top of my gist now to really then get to have a major educational change on how they use energy. A lot of restaurants are going to go out of business in the next 6 months unless they change their policies. Those cookers have got to be switched off if they're not in use. We've got to switch the extract fans off if they're not being in use. And that's that part of that government, is writing the policies and having a mechanism to follow them through. Modern methods of construction, MMCs, are where we're looking at trying to advance into hybrid or whole modular construction. So again, you're trying to build something in a factory in much better conditions, so the quality is better, and then site time's better, and there's less mess on site. And that will start coming into targets with ESG settings. Indeed, there was a recent report by Savills, the building surveyors and estate agents, revealing that the percentage of new housing being constructed with advanced building methods is expected to be over 20% by the year 2030. Then if you start coupling that then with whole life carbon roadmaps, that they want to try to bring in with the built environment, and then government funding is potentially being talked about, where that's going to force us as designers to really start looking towards that modular build and that reduction of that carbon roadmap during the lifetime of that building. And like a lot of these things, I think that's going to become more and more of the norm as we try and follow these new standards. So deciding who is going to be responsible for an ESG friendly building and also MMC is obviously very much debatable. Contractors clearly are under a lot of pressure to deliver green and sustainable solutions, usually and almost definitely with very tight budget constraints. And then usually then the tenants and the clients also want it done super quick, which is putting that lot of pressure on the contractors. I think really to make it work successfully, our government, does also need to bear some responsibility. And, whilst they're going to steadily start introducing more regulations to encourage more ESG-friendly buildings, latest building regulations are, for example, starting to demand that new houses and buildings and major refurbishments of existing buildings all now have to include electrical charging points. Again, this is starting to go down that line of taking us down that path of, if the country has everything generated for heating and cooling and hot water using electrically driven things, and our cars electrically driven, and then in the same parallels that the whole of the national grid will come off of gas, oil, coal, and fossil fuels, and dominantly be powered with nuclear energy and renewables. And that kind of makes us, our grid is not producing much in the way of CO2, and therefore the things we're using are using non-CO2 sources, and we try and become carbon neutral that way. And that's our government's plan for us to really become carbon neutral by 2050. But, in all honesty, every single one of us starts needing to take some personal responsibility. And that question really is are we all doing enough? And probably, no, we're not, and we can all do more, can't we? But we've all got to start taking steps in the right direction. We've all got to turn that thermostat down at the office and at home. We've done some complex modelling on a new dwelling recently, and it was using a gas supply at the
And at 6:30 this morning, you, Elizabeth, had already been through the cathedral. How many times? Maybe 5.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Somebody's who's on mute. Can you somebody's come off mute? And all I can hear is talking about cathedral. Thank you. Sorry, I've lost my thought bit there. I thought that was a question. Sorry, beg your pardon. Forgive me. Yes, so are we honest? In all honesty, are we doing enough? We all need to be more efficient. We all need to use less energy. That's the bottom line. Look at Germany with their problems with Russian gas. They're demanding all of their occupants have much shorter showers, do not have baths. The thermostats that they want, they're able to turn the thermostats down in their houses, and by 1 or 2 degrees, and wear thick jumpers. Very approximately, and it's probably a good fact for everybody on this call to take home. Typically, most houses are set to 21 degrees. Pretty well much every 1 degrees you drop that thermostat in your house, that's going to save you about 20% of energy. And to give you an example, I mean, a typical house now can easily be costing you £2,500 a year on your gas bill. So every 1 degree you potentially could be saving £500. And if you theoretically went down to 16 degrees, your gas bill could be down at about £650. Now, I'm not suggesting that you're going to have 16-degree houses, because they'd be pretty cold, but it just shows a graph of how that temperature does impact. And if you're lucky enough to have spare bedrooms that are only used at weekends for guests, make sure that thermostat is set down to number 1 or 16 degrees, and shut the door and run those rooms much cooler. And you'll be surprised at the impact that's going to have on reducing the carbon, reducing the gas, and also reducing your bill. This, I guess, is what our parents did. Really, in the 1960s, when energy was so expensive. They reduced how much energy they used. They said they couldn't afford to have showers every day and baths every day. They only heated essential rooms and periods of the time when, they just didn't have the heating on. And I think that's what we're all going to have to look at. We may have to look at that this Christmas, with the the restriction on gas around the world, and Russia restricting gas flows to Europe. We've all got to get in the habit of putting jumpers on and slippers on, and coming to the office with sensible clothes, going home and wearing sensible thick clothes that will help reduce that environmental part. Another area where I think people have no understanding or consideration is mobile phones and streaming on your smartphones. And people to understand is how much energy streaming uses. I was at a conference, a data center conference, about 4 years ago, and Google and the various other big names were there, and they've worked out that streaming was using about 1% of world energy use, and they were predicting that to rise in 5 years to about 3%. So it's entirely possible now, 4 years later, that we're approaching 3% of world energy use is kind of connected to your telephone and streaming. And now I can probably hear some of you saying, what? How's that possible? It doesn't cost anything to heat up, to do the battery on my phone. But it's all of the information on that phone that's back at data centers. I suppose there is a bit of energy, keep charging that phone once or twice a day, but it's, the cloud is an imaginary thing that people say, oh, my photographs are stored in the cloud. What is the cloud? Well, the cloud is a great big room somewhere full of computers that's storing your pictures, storing your videos, storing your emails and your messages. And the more and more you have of those, the more and more these data centers and these clouds that you have. And they are then basically full of very, very powerful servers that run 24/7, that need constant cooling, electrical power to keep their servers turning over. A few years ago, I did see a documentary about Facebook, and they were building what they were calling these new super low energy deep storage data centers. And they were kind of bringing on one every month. And they were for what they called legacy pictures on people's Facebook accounts, where people hadn't looked at a picture for at least 5 to 10 years. They would put them in some sort of recessed deep storage, which is, just goes to show that each one of those buildings sort of uses about the same power as Swindon. And they're building more and more of them, and what they were looking at doing was putting them in much more extreme locations where it's kind of really quite cold all year round, and then try to bring loads and loads of fresh air in across them and cool them and make them as efficient as possible. But they're still incredibly energy hungry buildings. And maybe we should all go through our phones tonight and delete a number of those pictures. If you're like me and you take them with the children, you take 5 or 6 and you leave them on the phone and maybe print out the best one or send the best one to somebody else. But we've probably all got hundreds of thousands of pictures on our phones, in our networks and on our computers that are stored in remote sites that are using energy. And that's something maybe just to think about, deleting some of our junk videos and our pictures from our friends, or silly videos that have been sent from other people, is certainly a way you could potentially start trying to save some of that 3% of energy use. So I believe that currently we're still in a large transition phase. Whilst there seems to be a lot of focus on the environmental element of ESG, and with energy efficiency of buildings being the key concern, for that race to zero by 2050, all 3 elements do hold significance and importance. And if we want a truly ESG compliant building and achieve that net zero, then we do need to start addressing today rather than the future. And what's the best way of doing that? Well, the best thing is to start building good buildings. And by that I mean is, we can't go cutting any corners. Whilst it's tempting with cost pressures, the skill shortages, and other challenges I mentioned earlier, the industry that it is currently facing. But we've got to build good, high quality buildings. I was recently involved in some brand new units, and in the end, the person I was representing, the person that was going to buy them, didn't buy them in the end because so many corners have been cut. The electrical power supplies were sized without any thought for car chargers. The EPCs for these brand new buildings were a low B. And even then I was slightly worried because all they had was electrical panel heaters in. They hadn't put insulation in the floor. They'd put the minimum amount of insulation on the walls. And these are brand new units, and really should we be designing down to that level? We need to be building good buildings that are going to be a good and low efficiency for us for the long time, not the short term of the developer trying to make as absolutely much as he possibly can. We need good buildings and we need good people designing that with that in mind, which is really part of that ESG type framework. We need buildings to last. We need products that aren't going to fall over and be replaced in 10 years. They need to be last much longer. Look at Victorian buildings, look at some of the fantastic bridges we've got, some of the stone buildings we've got, built to last 200 years. Yes, the cladding costs more, but it doesn't catch fire and need replacing in 10 years. We need to start building good quality buildings. And the worst thing we can do really is just pay lip service to this, and then have to tear that building down in 20 years. We need to be thinking about the future and building longevity. So having said all this, these challenges ahead, they shouldn't be underestimated. We are expected as an industry to design more sustainable, smarter buildings with tighter budgets and a shrinking workforce. In effect, doing more for less. Only way we can do that, we're going to have to be smarter. ESG commitments will not only grow in importance for sustainable buildings, but soon I think they will become the basis for most sustainable companies. Therefore, we don't want our building left empty because no company wants to take it because the EPC is too poor. It has no sustainable qualities. It has no social or no governance policies. So we all, as designers of construction, I think really need to get into this process, understand these modern technologies, look at modern methods of building construction. It may be harder to design, but is it going to be cheaper, easier, and more cost effective to have a modular type building? As part of the commitment to ESG, I believe we can future-proof our buildings, but it is going to take some hard work and challenges ahead. Now, with that, I pretty well got then about 20 minutes for any questions. I appreciate I've glossed over quite a lot, but I just would be interested in anybody taking any questions, and I'll stop recording now so that